So I want to talk about my theory of the Hegelian dialectic. This is commonly known throughout as the dialectic that Hegel kind of comes up with in his works. The term had been in existence previously, but it kind of exists in a threefold manner where it's the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So you have a thesis, which is one state of affairs, an antithesis, and sort of a synthesis. Hegel provides many examples of this. One of them is in his discussions of history. He posited this idea that society didn't really think for themselves. And this might be a little simplified. I think Hegel admitted this. But he was on to something about the concept of citizens didn't really partake in, citizens or what you would call them, didn't really partake in societal deliberations. It was more of a monarchy or an oligarchy or things like that, or even the Oracle of Delphi. And he gives the example that Socrates started questioning the Oracle of Delphi and got this idea that people should start questioning ideas so that they could progress society that way. However, that was an Athenian society, and Hegel posited that that meant that Athenian society could no longer continue. He said that this kind of progressed and regressed throughout history up to the French Revolution, that people thought for themselves a little bit more in certain societies and a little bit less. And then he said in the French Revolution, there reached an antithesis where everyone was thinking for themselves in the French Revolution. That was also unstable. So you had your thesis where no one was thinking for themselves, and then antithesis where everyone's thinking for themselves. And that synthesis is the idea that over time, you can kind of go beyond and you go back and forth and like that. So I wrote an article actually, which was also my senior thesis when I was an undergraduate. And I wrote my senior thesis at Harvard was that, and I actually ended up writing this in a law review article, that history progresses through this thesis and antithesis paradigm, and I had exhibited it before in other classes in workspace, professors such as Neil Ferguson in his West and the Rest book, that I wanted to apply the Hegelian dialectic to U.S. voting rights. Now, I felt like this fit in pretty well, and certainly there are counter-arguments that you start off with a thesis where nobody really has the right to vote except white men with property, as was the beginning, for the most part, in the 13 colonies that eventually became the United States. Then over time, there was an expansion, sort of a synthesis of the ideas of equality embedded in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Lincoln has a famous quote of, the Declaration of Independence is this golden apple and the Constitution is the frame, and we're trying to get the frame to fit into that golden apple. I think that there were progresses. You go through Jacksonian democracy, expanding the right to vote to all men, all white men, regardless of what property they own. And then former slaves received the right to vote. Of course, there were regressions with Jim Crow laws. And then you even go further, the Indian rights to vote in 1920. You have the women's suffrage movement. You have the 1964 Civil Rights Act, to where you reach this antithesis where almost everyone can vote. And I felt, although I seem there are many counter-arguments and deconstructions, and you can perhaps argue that this thesis, synthesis, antithesis examination of Hegel is perhaps too simplified, but I felt like that was an example of Hegel's dialectic.